hear.
Well, hello, I'm Debbie Kitterman, and welcome to Dare to Hear the podcast, where we encourage you and equip you to dare to hear the voice of God. Well, today I am really excited to bring on a friend and my next guest, Kathi Lipp. We're going to talk about her book, Ready for Anything. And I think with what we've all been experiencing here in 2020, that none of us saw coming, that it was a really good topic. But first, let me introduce you to who Kathi is, and then we're just going to jump right in. So, Kathi Lipp is a national speaker, podcast host of Clutter Free Academy, and the best-selling author of The Husband Project, Clutter Free, and Overwhelmed. She and her husband Roger live in California and are parents of 4 young adults. Using humor and wisdom, Kathi offers hope paired with practical steps to those looking to live with meaning. You can follow Kathi at kathilipp.com, and we'll give you all of her other social media stuff at the end of the show. So, Kathi, welcome, and thank you for joining me today on the podcast.
Hello, my gorgeous friend. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I wanted to talk to you about your book because I know it actually was scheduled to release later in 2020. And then
Yeah.
your publisher was like, hey, we have this COVID crisis and everything. We need to push your book out. So your book's actually been out since February?
Right, like February, March is really when we did the e-version as quickly as we could, and then the print version came right after that
Okay.
because they felt like I talked about N95 masks and toilet paper in the book. So like if I don't, if you want to call it prophetic, that's totally fine by me. But yeah,
Yes.
it was about. I don't mention pandemics in the book,
No, you
but
don't.
all the prepping is the same, whether it's a pandemic, an earthquake, or whatever.
Yeah, and that's so true because when I was reading it, I thought, wow, this is such a timely message. And I know, and being an author, you obviously know this as well, that it takes about 18 months to go through the publishing house. So this
Yes.
book was something that you had on your heart way before.
Yeah, I've been talking with my agent about this since probably around 2016. We had a situation at our house where we had a fire, and I think everybody assumes they know what they're going to do when a disaster comes, and we did everything wrong. Like it didn't even matter what it was. We chose the wrong thing. And at that point you just have to decide what I've got to be a better planner, and planning is not something that comes naturally to me. So to really go through this process was an exercise in peace to say, okay, I may not be able to do everything perfectly, but I can prepare myself to make the best decisions.
Yeah, that's so good. And I loved how you started the story. And you really do use humor throughout because I mean, if you cannot laugh at, your situation, then hey,
Yeah.
other people, laugh with them. Don't just let them laugh at you. But I thought
Yes.
starting off with the story, because we always think, oh, I'm going to be prepared for it. When it happens, I
Yeah.
know what I'm going to do. But when you're in the moment, you kind of lose your brain.
Well, it's this panic response. Now, you have people who are like first responders, doctors, nurses, those kind of people. They know what to do in an emergency situation because they've been preparing for it for years and years and years.
Yeah.
They don't just let a nurse onto the operating floor. They've been preparing for every scenario. But yeah, so what happened was we lived in townhouses, and somebody came and knocking on our door and was screaming fire. And both my husband and I were working at home that day. And so we grabbed the dog and ran downstairs. I had my phone. Roger was barefoot. I was barefoot. We didn't even have a leash for the dog. We had to hold our dog the entire time. And this is a 40-pound dog. And then we're standing out on the front lawn with all of our neighbors, and we see 2 doors down that our neighbor's house is totally engulfed in flames.
Mm.
And we're only 2 walls away from that happening to our house. And we're standing out there, and I say to Roger, hey, Jeremy didn't come home from school, did he? And it was our son's first day of college, and I didn't know his schedule. And Roger said, no, we would have heard him if he, and then Roger goes running into the house.
Oh, no.
And about 30 seconds later, Roger comes running out, and I'm like, oh, thank God. Okay, everything's okay. And about 45 seconds later, Jeremy comes running out of the house. So it turns out he had come home from school saw that both of us were working and fell fast asleep in his room and was not at all disturbed. Yeah, he had the sleep of a 19-year-old,
Mm,
face down coma like. And
yeah,
so
I remember those days.
I like to tell people that, yeah, we were the people who, Roger wants people to know he ran into a burning building for his child.
Yeah.
But I'm like, it's hard to escape the fact that we grabbed the dog and left the kid in the burning building. So I don't want to make that mistake again.
Yeah, no, and I wouldn't either, but that's the way it is sometimes
Yeah.
that, we think we're prepared for something. So as I was reading your book, there was a couple things that I wanted to pull out about it,
Yeah.
because I think it's so important. So the book is Ready for Anything, Prepare Your Heart and Home for Any Crisis, Big or Small. So when you see that title, people might go, being prepared for any disaster,
Right.
it's a little overwhelming, but
Yeah.
I really thought, Kathi, that you did a great job breaking it down into bite-sized, manageable pieces. In fact, one of the things that you write about is getting the reader ready for the 3-2-3. And that's really the goal of the book that you put throughout it. And so can you kind of talk with me about what the 3-2-3 is?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at the Red Cross, anything, their guidelines is you should be able to leave your house for 3 days and have everything you need. So that would mean having a to go kit that has water, food, change of clothes, dog food if you have a dog, that kind of thing. Then the two is 2 weeks of staying in your house without going to the store, without going anywhere. Do you have enough and if your utilities are shut off, so do you have enough water?
Mm,
What would you do about cooking, that kind of thing? And the last one is 3 months of emergency funds. And so when you say get ready for anything, it's like, okay, I'm ready for earthquake and tornado and pandemic. But here's the thing, if you can leave your house for 3 days, if you can stay home for 2 weeks, and you have 3 months emergency fund, that's going to help with a lot of different disasters. You may not know what's coming, but nobody has ever said, we had this emergency and I just had too much money saved. Like, that's
yeah.
not usually the issue. And when I originally put 2 weeks worth of food and water in the book, my whole team was like, Kathi, that's crazy. When are you ever going to be in your house for 2 weeks where you can't leave? And I didn't want to be right on this, but it's the Red Cross. We'll blame them. They were the
Yeah, we're
ones
going
who
to
were
blame the
right.
Red Cross. Well, and I thought especially here in 2020, like none of us saw it coming,
No.
but with the three and in the midst of all this, you live in California, I live in Washington,
Yeah.
but there was fires up and down the West
Oh,
Coast. And
yes,
so
absolutely.
people were needing to leave their homes,
Yeah.
possibly for more than 3 days,
Right.
but this information is so powerful. And that's, you had one chapter on there, I think it was prep number 3, that talked about knowing what your crisis could be in your area.
Yeah. Yeah.
And go
So for
ahead.
you and me, it is, it's definitely wildfires.
Yeah.
And the 3 days isn't so that, you'll be back in your house in 3 days. It's 3 days so you can make decisions
Yeah.
about where you need to go. Hopefully, there'll be a friend or a hotel or something that you can bunk down in. But if you needed to be in your car for 3 days, just driving out or getting where you need to go, you could do that. And so, yeah, it's for me, it's wildfire, it's snowstorms. We are in the midst this week of preparing for a snowstorm, and it's not even the middle of November when we're
Right.
recording this. It's nuts. And so we're doing all that prep now, but it's understanding what is the potential for you. Like, floods are not a big deal for us, but they are for other people.
Yeah.
Tornadoes are not going to happen on the mountain I live on, but they are going to happen in Kansas.
Yeah, they are. And like we actually have a volcano that's not too far from us. It's
Right.
not blown, but another one has, back in
Yeah.
the 80s. And so some people are like, "Oh yeah, that's not a big deal." But in reality, it could happen. We just have to be prepared. And that's what I loved about your book, especially like when people are hearing your 3-2-3, 3 days, 2 weeks food, and 3 months of money to live on. But you break it down into smaller pieces with the money
Yeah.
thing. I mean, you give them a step 1, do this, step 2, do this, and then work on it. And not only do you tell them how to do it, you say, here's some practical ways that you can actually get more money. And I really appreciated that.
Well, I mean, I let me just be honest, I've been terrible with money most of my life, and it's only in the past few years that I've kind of gotten it together. So if you had told me, 10, 15 years ago, you need to have 3 months emergency savings, I'm like, well, and you know what? We should also set a place at the table for the Easter bunny because they're both as likely to happen. But you know what? There are ways to do this. And here's the thing, to have that 3-month emergency fund, you may not be able to have it now. But what I'm trying to say is, can you save up $100?
Yeah.
And then your next goal is 500 and 1,000. And then it's not just for it to sit there and look pretty, but when your dishwasher goes out, instead of putting it on a credit card, can you use that emergency fund and pay yourself back?
Yeah.
And, those are the things that I want people to start thinking through so that because cash gives you options.
It does.
And without options, you're going to feel stuck and scared. And that's not what I want for people.
Yeah, no, not. And, absolutely not, especially here. Like, a lot of people do, cashless society. So they're going to the store, but when the credit card machine isn't working, you can't get food or you can't do stuff. That's
No,
happened here when power goes out. Like they cannot connect, but they can take my cash. And so it's
right.
always good to have cash on hand. And you have to think about that.
And you know what? It's also good to always have something in the bank with that card because
Yeah.
there are places now that won't take cash. So you have to work it from both sides. But the other thing I've learned is to keep some cash on hand just in case of emergency because what if you need to pay somebody to, shovel your driveway and you can't Venmo them?
Yeah.
Cash is good.
Yes, it is. It's so good. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you as I'm reading this book that I was thinking through, the whole hearing from God and trusting God piece,
Yeah.
and how is not trusting God, you know, and preparing for anything, like where
Yeah.
does that come in?
Uh,
Because some people say, well, you're just not trusting God if you're preparing and you're prepping.
right. Right.
But really, there's a spiritual nugget in here that preparing is trusting God. So can we
I
talk about that?
Yeah, I absolutely, it's so interesting that people say, "Well, I'll just trust God in the emergency." And I'm like, I don't see anything biblical about not preparing. And the whole emphasis of this book is you're not just preparing for yourself, you're preparing so you can help others.
Yeah.
And so I look at scripture where God wants us to be the helpers. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean we're never in a time of help. I remember that volcano blowing in Washington
Yeah.
as a high school student. That was scary stuff, and I remember people going from California to help people in Washington. That's what we want to be. We want to be the helpers. But there's a great adage that just says, "Trust God and tie up your horse." It's not, but tie up your horse. It's like be practical. There's nothing in me that wants to test God. I want to do everything I can to be to it's a balance of wisdom. And wisdom does not preclude faith. So wisdom says I have canned foods at my house because I might not be able to get the store. I have to prepare for a month of not being able to get to the store because of where we live.
Yeah.
There is nothing that lacks faith in that. That says, you know what? I trust God, but I also employ wisdom. And I see that throughout scripture. And I
Mhm.
want to be that Proverbs 31 woman who sews clothes for her family. Okay, I can't sew, but you know what I mean. And those ideas that I store up food, that
Yeah.
I'm able to take care of the people who are taking care of us. And Debbie, one of the things that we did with the money that we saved up, we run basically a bed and breakfast or writer's retreat. You've been there.
Yeah.
And we employ somebody to come in and clean after those retreats and reset the house back to zero. They clean better than I ever could. Well, obviously we didn't have any work for them to do because of this, but we were able to take some of that emergency fund and keep paying them even though they weren't coming to our house to clean.
Mm.
And because God told us to.
Yeah.
God, we listen to God. We're like, who in our community can we help? And it's like, just keep employing the people you employ. It was so direct from God. And we could only do that because we had money saved up.
Yeah. And I like that. I like that's the important piece because it's not just, and you say this, that in prep number 7, you talk about your stockpile isn't just for you. It's not
No.
just for you. And that as people of God, that we have to do what he said, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and your neighbor as yourself. And
Mhm.
if we're only stockpiling or doing things to prep for ourselves, then we're not really loving our neighbor. And so I
Right.
wanted to talk a little bit about this because later on in the book, um, the Acts church in Acts 4:32, where they loved one another and they were of one heart, one mind. They
Mhm.
were in unity and they shared everything.
Right.
And so, and you really took it to, it's the next level of neighborliness. So
Yes.
can we kind of talk about that and how that ties in?
Yeah, I'll just bring up an example, and I'm sorry I'm using examples of like, okay, when we did things right. Can we please hear between you and me, Debbie, that I did things wrong for decades.
Yeah.
And but when I finally started to get this, I realized like when we prepped our pantry for our mountain retreat, one of the things that we did is when we weren't having retreats there, we were renting it out for Airbnb. Well, we had a group that was scheduled to come, and I got a message from them. They said, "Is there any way we could come a day or two earlier? We live in the area where the campfire is happening." This was 2018.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, "Yes, come." Well, they came with the clothes on their back and the dogs on their leash. That's
Yeah.
all they had. Well, Roger and I had stocked our pantry and we said, "You guys, here's the key. Everything, whatever you need, take it. It's yours."
Yeah.
And, Paradise, California, 95% of it burnt up and including their homes. But they had a safe place to be,
Yeah.
and we have to think like that. It's not just to protect our own family. There's nothing biblical about just taking care of ourselves. It's about, I take care of the people that God has placed in front of me. And you
Yeah.
don't know when that's going to happen. And the resources what make it so you are able to be generous. You're able to take care of yourself, but you're able to take care of the next person.
Yeah. And I think that's so good because I think, I mean, even all through Proverbs, it talks about a wise man does this and does
Yes.
this. And I used to look and I had to laugh because when I was reading your part about Proverbs 31, I'm like,
Mm.
oh, I so relate. But
Yeah.
it's that one scripture where she can look at the future and she can laugh
Laugh.
and she
It's
can
the
laugh.
best thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
sometimes people look at, I was just talking to my mom yesterday. She's like, well, I have to have all of my plans. And I'm like, Mom, we have a plan. Why are you making plan C, D, E, and F, G? And
Yes.
she's like, well, because I'm like, because you're fearful. Mom, you need to stand here.
Right.
You need to trust God. You need to prepare, right? You
Yes.
need to prepare, but you can look at the future and you can laugh in the face of it
Right.
because you've prepared. You've done your
Yes.
job. You've done your
Oh, Debbie, the perfect example of this is Roger saying, this is back in March. Kathy, I'm concerned about our toilet paper. I'm like, babe, we are good through 2022. Don't you even worry. Like I we were prepared because of we have people come to the house and stuff, but
yeah,
I was prepared for our next group of 10 to come and I had toilet paper for them plus some. I'm like, don't you worry. I
we're
got you,
good.
babe. Yes. And so I was able to laugh at it.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't even have to worry. This
Oh,
is not
this
our
is
concern.
it's so funny. I think it's one of the things where we do the practical steps and then we ask God, what is it that you want us to do? And I think we need to check in with God every now and then. Like I had a friend when this whole thing started. I was actually traveling, so I didn't come home until April. So
I
I'm like
remember.
I'm
Yeah.
traveling in the height of the pandemic, right? And so I get home and my one friend says to me, "Oh yeah, I got plenty of toilet paper stored up in the attic." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, back in December I just asked the Lord, is there something I'm supposed to do?" And he's like, "Yeah, every time you go to Costco, I want you to buy a thing of toilet paper." And he's like, "That is the strangest thing." But he did it. And I was like, "I'm coming to your house."
Oh my goodness, right? And
Yeah.
we were able to share our toilet paper with other people. And more importantly, when we went shopping, toilet paper, every time, we did the shoppers
Yeah.
and they said, "Don't you want toilet paper?" And we're like, "No, leave it for the people who need it." Now they probably thought we were naturalists or something, using leaves, but we were good. We didn't have to worry. And without us having to worry, we were able to serve that unknown person who desperately needed the toilet paper and didn't have it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. On page 187 in your book, you say this. You say being ready for anything isn't just a checklist of canned foods to buy in case of emergency. It's a complete mindset change. And I
Absolutely.
loved that because people are like, "Oh, um, I'm not a prepper. I don't need to do that. I mean, is there really going to be another pandemic anytime
Right.
soon?" But the reality of the fact is it's not just about those things. It's about a mindset shift of what can I do to serve my neighbors, to serve my
Right.
community, and what is God asking me to do in the moment?
Debbie, one of the best moments I had during the pandemic was, we of course live in fire country, and so we had a little supply of N95 masks.
Mm,
And, we have to keep those on hand because if there's a fire, we have to be wearing that as we're leaving. But my publicist on this book, Robin, her husband is a medical professional, and they were the people who were scrubbing those N95 masks and rewearing them. I was able to send her husband those N95 masks, except for two, one for me and one for Roger in case there was a fire.
yeah,
But it, God gave us that directive
yeah,
to have those N95 masks on hand.
yeah.
And I knew I could send those to Robin's husband without worrying because God's got us sewn up on the left and the right, the front and the back. We are good. And so we can share out of that abundance. But if we don't think about the abundance, we can't share.
Absolutely. That is so true. And I think that we need, when we're thinking about the natural disasters and stuff, I mean, no one saw that the whole economy was going to shut down and
No.
that things were going to happen that way. I mean, my daughter, she lost her job too. And,
Yeah.
she was like, oh my gosh, but she had an emergency fund. We do Dave
Right.
Ramsey around here. So she had a thousand
Yes.
dollar emergency fund. And so she was prepared for that.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, and it took several months. I mean, she applied for unemployment and she did all that, but it took several months for her to get her stuff. So she was living at home, so that did help.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
but in this time, people need to begin to think, what is it that I need to do going forward, and take the practical steps for the 3-2-3 that you talk about, and then also asking God, what else do I need to do? What are you asking me to
Mm,
do? Because I think, like, if we all stirred up rice, we're all going to get tired of rice. But
right.
I know that my other friends, they have different things that they feel like God has asked them to stir up on, and God's asked us to stir up on other things. And I was able to send yeast to my friend who is an Etsy
Mm,
baker because she couldn't get it where she was at.
yeah.
And so she was like, I need yeast. I can't do this. I'm going to have to shut my store. Well, this was part of their income to pay for their bills. And I was like, I got yeast. I can send it to you. She's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah.
Wow.
So I'm not making any bread. I'm not making pizza dough right now. No,
Yeah.
I'm eating the tater tots. So I just sent her that, and it was so great. Like, we were able to connect across, not in the same area. So she's my neighbor, even though she lives in Nashville. I was
Yeah,
able to help her. I was able
absolutely.
to send what she needed, and she was able to still continue. And so we need to think that way. What is God asking us to do? I mean, I have a Costco size, yeast thing. I can send you some. It's totally
Right.
fine. And so
Yeah.
we need to be thinking about that. Okay. So as we wrap up today, I have one final question, and then I want you to tell us where we can connect with you. But for everyone that's watching and listening today, how and what one thing can they do to be better prepared tomorrow for an emergency?
Yeah. So I would say, can I give you two? I think it's
Yes,
really, really important.
two.
Okay. Get $101 bills
Mhm.
and fill up one container of water. So if you there's these things called aquatainers. They hold 7 gallons of water. You need a gallon of water per person per day for 2 weeks. So if that's two of you, that's 28 gallons of water. So I want you to get four of these containers eventually, but just today, get that one 7 gallon container and fill it up with water and $101 bills. You're never going to say that water was a waste. You will always find something to use it for. And you're never going to say, I wish I didn't have those $100 bills, $101 bills.
Right.
You will always be able to use them for something. And in an emergency, that's your basic starter kit and you can grow from there.
Yeah, that is so good. Well, Kathi, thank you so much for joining us to really talk about your book, Ready for Anything. I think if 2020 has showed us anything, it's that we need to be ready for
Yeah.
because you never know when a pandemic or you're going to lose your job or wildfires are going to come or snowstorms out of
Yes.
season. I
Out
mean,
of season.
never know. So we
Yeah.
have to be prepared. So how can people connect with you? How can they get copies of your book?
Yeah, my favorite way for people to connect is on Facebook. So you can go to Kathi Lipp Author, or we have a great group called Clutter Free Academy. Part of getting ready is decluttering, taking the stuff out of your house that you no longer need. And Clutter Free Academy is a great safe place to do that. And you can get Ready for Anything at Amazon, any place that sells books. And of course, we love when you order through a tiny independent bookstore. It just makes, every time you do that, an angel gets its wings. So,
That's right.
yes,
It's so good because we want to support them because they've been closing all over
yes.
the place and we do want to support them. So, again, the book is Ready for Anything, Preparing Your Heart and Home for Any Crisis, Big or Small by Kathi Lipp. So, Kathi, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Debbie, thank you for helping people get prepared. I'm so happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm Debbie Kitterman. I want to thank you for listening to Dare to Hear the podcast, where we encourage you to dare to hear the voice of God. If you've been encouraged in any way, we would ask that you share this podcast episode and also get a copy of Kathi's book. Christmas is coming, and also buy one for a friend, because that's one of the challenges that she gives you in the back of the book is don't prep for anything alone. Do it with a friend because it makes it easier. So again, if you've been encouraged anyway, share this, help us get the message out about Ready for Anything by Kathi Lipp. And we look forward to having you join us next week on Dare to Hear the podcast. Until then, God bless and bye.